Hi everyone, welcome back to my kitchen. Today we're making a pumpkin pie with a homemade crust. And I know I've received a couple of comments through my Instagram asking me for a homemade pie crust recipe. So I decided I'm going to make a homemade crust for my pumpkin pie. Pie crusts are very delicate and there are a couple of rules that you have to follow or it'll be a disaster. I've been there, I've made many pie crusts and things happen. So a few things to know. All of your liquids have to be ice cold. So right now I have some water that's in the freezer. It's not frozen, it's just in a little glass in the freezer. The butter, if you're using butter, and the shortening, if you're using shortening, has to be in the fridge. It has to be cold. You don't want anything to be room temperature. If you start using ingredients that are room temperature, things are not going to mix well. It's not going to be the right consistency. So I have a list here of the ingredients that I'm using. You should make sure that you have all of them available. And I'm making a double pie crust. So I'm making enough crust for 2 pies. I'm just gonna freeze half. I figured if I'm going through the trouble of making a pie crust, I want to have an additional one. So I'm using 3 cups of flour, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, 12 tablespoons of butter, 6 tablespoons of vegetable shortening, 4 tablespoons of iced water, and 4 tablespoons of ice cold rum. Couple of notes. If you don't want to use shortening, just use butter. So instead of the, 12 tablespoons of butter, you would use 18 tablespoons of butter. If you don't want to use rum, then instead of using 4 tablespoons of ice water, use 8 tablespoons of iced water. Those are some quick substitutions that you can make, but you have to be sure of what you're doing before you start making the pie. Okay, so let's start with our dry ingredients. Bring this a little bit closer. And these are 3 exact cups of flour. What I usually do is I just put it over the bag and I take a knife and I try to level it. I'm gonna put it in my little sector. Here's our 1 teaspoon of salt. It's always really important to season your mix. We're not using pepper, but we are using salt. Please use salt, don't skip the salt. I'm using this attachment with my electric mixer. So if you have one, this is the attachment you'd use. And if you have an electric mixer, I'm just using stir. So this has different levels. It's stir 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I'm using stir, I'm leaving it in stir. So now it's time to add the cold ingredients, and this is where we just have to do this a little bit fast. We want to make sure that those ingredients don't get warm. So before I start adding the ingredients, let me just describe the consistency or the texture that we're looking for. We want to mix this until it looks like clumpy sand or breadcrumbs, right? It's not going to be smooth. It's not going to look like a really smooth ball of dough. No, it's going to look very grainy. The first thing I'm doing is adding the butter. These are the 6 tablespoons of shortening already cut into small pieces. So we're slowly adding in the rum. Now we're slowly adding in the ice cold water. And we're ready. We're refrigerating our dough after we roll it out into a ball and split it in 2. So I'm splitting this in half. We're wrapping it with cling wrap and we're putting it in the fridge. So you want to make sure you have your cling wrap available. I have my cling wrap here. So now I'm just dumping this on my surface. You can see how crumbly it is, and I've been mentioning throughout the video, that's the consistency. This is the texture that you want. So now with your hands, you're going to bring this together. You're going to sort of knead it. You don't want to overwork the dough. You just want to bring it together to form a ball. Okay, this is our dough. Now we want to split this in half. You can use a dough cutter, which really looks like a knife. So I'm using a knife. They have special tools for it. I'm just using a knife. I'm using the blunt edge. Okay, so this is our first ball. Let's go ahead and, I think that's good enough. Wrap it in our cling wrap. When it's in the cling wrap, you sort of want to flatten it out a little bit so it looks like a disc. You don't want to put it in the fridge as a ball. This is my first crust. It's okay if some of the edges breaks. If you see some cracks on it, that's fine. We're gonna put it in the fridge. We want the butter and the shortening to harden back up. We don't want this melting. This is going in the fridge for at least an hour. You can leave it overnight. You can freeze it. This freezes well. You can keep it in the freezer for, I think, about 3 to 6 months. But I'm putting both of mine in the fridge. I'm leaving them there for at least an hour, and then I'll see you again to start making our pumpkin pie. We're ready to start rolling out our dough. The first thing we have to do is flour our surface to make sure that the dough isn't sticking. So I'm just gonna go ahead, start flattening my dough, rolling it out. You'll see how I do it, and then once I'm done and I'm ready to transfer it to the pie dish, I'll check in. We're ready to transfer our dough to our pie dish. This is very delicate right now. I have to be really careful. This is a 9.5 pie dish. So now when we go to transfer this to the pie dish, one thing that you can do is try to roll the dough onto the pin and then transfer it to the dish. I'm going to try to do it that way. If I see that the dough starts falling apart, I'll try something else. I can't believe that worked. This is probably for me the hardest part about making a pie, and it often breaks. As you can tell, there's parts of our dish that aren't covered with dough. We're gonna take care of that now. The first thing we wanna do is make sure that the dough is fitted into the dish. So now that I fit my dough into my dish, I'm gonna cut the excess, and I'm gonna use that to make sure that the edges are fully covered with dough. Okay, our pie crust is ready. This has to go in the freezer for 15 minutes before we put it in the oven. Our pie crust is ready to go into the oven for the blind bake. What I did was I covered it with aluminum foil or aluminum paper, and then I am weighing it down with uncooked rice. We want to blind bake it at 375 for 20 minutes just to make sure that the crust fully cooks through before we add the filling. So I'm gonna quickly pop this in the oven. This is 20 minutes of blind baking. This should be enough to cook the crust on the sides and the bottom and to keep it weighed down. We still have to cook it a little bit more, but we have to remove the aluminum paper and the rice to allow that layer of the crust to cook. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Before this goes back into the oven, we're gonna take a fork and make little holes in the bottom That allows the steam to come through and it won't lift the bottom of the crust. So now we're going to put this back in the oven for 20 minutes, just making sure that we cover the edges of the crust with more aluminum paper so that they don't burn. It's time to make the filling. These are all of the ingredients that I'm using. I'll put the measurements when I start tossing everything into the mixer. While our pie crust is out of the oven, you just saw that the mixture is ready. So this has been out for about 5 minutes. I think it's cool enough for us to pour the mixture in and then put it back in the oven. I also reduced the temperature of the oven from 375 to 325. I had made a tiny decorative pumpkin with a little bit of crust that was left over, and I just noticed that the crust cracked here in this edge just a tiny bit. So I think I'm gonna end up using my pumpkin to try to patch that crack. It's not going to be perfect, but I'm fine with it. This is ready to go in the oven. It's going to bake for 50 to 60 minutes. I'm going to keep an eye on it. I'll see you soon. Our pumpkin pie is complete. I'm really happy with the final product. It was in the oven for exactly 60 minutes. I put a toothpick in the center. It came out clean. The center was still a little jiggly, so I pulled it out and it's done. Yeah, it's still pretty hot, but I'm happy. I'm happy with it. I can't wait to try it tomorrow. If you're trying it the same day you're making it, give it about 3 hours for it to cool. And if you tried the recipe the same way I did it, let me know if you liked it, if you enjoyed the flavors, if you like using the rum. I think it adds a nice touch to the crust, but if you use something else, I would love to hear about it. Thank you for watching. Like and share and subscribe if you want to see more videos.